Direct from Taos, New Mexico, it's the To Walk with Giants podcast with indie comic book creator Cody Fernandez and indie musical artist Christopher Messick.
Howdy, folks. Welcome to Walk with Giants. I'm Cody Fernandez, joined by...
Christopher Messick, aka Laguna Munta. Thanks for joining us today. We have an interesting topic, I think, for this one.
I'm thinking so. We'll see. Certainly another important topic. I mean, that's kind of the point of what we do here. If you folks are interested, of course, please check out our previous episodes. You might find a topic that resonates with you, and we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, and you feel free to recommend one. This one is a recommendation from one of our viewers. So shout out to Dr. Graves. Thanks for the adaptability recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, we've been adapting this whole time. This is our...
Right.
This is the third episode done in this format?
Yep.
All right, good. I'm remembering correctly because I got to adapt to that thing known as the memory as well.
Yes.
So adaptability. Well, I mean, at its base level, it is constructive change? I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah. It's well, I guess one of the first things, that pops into my mind is it's the ability to overcome and adjust to new situations.
There you go.
And typically smoothly and maybe quickly. That's kind of what I think of. It's this kind of thinking on your feet idea. And especially in the creative field, I think that's an important one. You have to realize when the tides are changing, when something isn't working. If you're playing music with other people, you have to go with that flow. You have to adapt to their sensibilities, or they can adapt to yours. And that's kind of the give and take of it all, is that fluctuation and that push-pull, I guess.
Yeah, no, specifically in music too, and I'm not fluent in musical language at all, but it's absolutely key in any form of improvisation, particularly in music, yes. but in any form of it, right? You look at like Whose Line Is It Anyway, kind of live improv stuff. That's all adaptability.
Yes.
Within arts,
and
of course.
So wit. I think wit has a lot to do with it.
There you go. Well,
because wit is that quick, adaptability to the situation. It's different, but I think if you have wit, you are adaptable.
Oh, absolutely. I think so as well. That's what made humanity. It was our intelligence that allowed us to conquer and adapt to basically every environment on this planet. Near every environment. There's a couple that are just not for our form of life, but right. Within intelligence, we were able to survive in places we have no business surviving. And so on that, and you mentioned wit as well, and so this is going to be an interesting bit, but I have a quote from Charles Darwin, which kind of felt very relevant to me.
Perfect.
The most important factor in survival is neither intelligence nor strength, but adaptability. And so specifically separating adaptability from those two, I find kind of interesting. Intelligence can lead to adaptability. Strength can lead to adaptability, but it itself is its own beast, right?
Yeah, and I think intelligence can prevent adaptability. I'm too smart for this. I'm not going to do it. This is below me. I will not do this. Let's say you're one of these unfortunate people who's gone to college and gotten your degree, and now you're in debt with student loans, whatnot, and you've spent so much time and energy trying to achieve a certain goal. And if there are no jobs available, it would feel beneath you to go get a fast food job. And that's not, and that obviously this person's intelligent if they were able to achieve this, but if they're not adaptable, that intelligence is going to hinder them because, I guess this, it might be a little stubborn.
I was going to say it, and then that also goes to the difference between intelligence and wisdom, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a big difference between those two as well.
True.
And but no, I think that's I like that quote quite a bit because again, you were talking about it from intelligence. I think strength could also be that as well because your perception of your strength and what your strengths are can limit your adaptability into new situations that you actually have strengths you're unaware of or have
Mm.
weaknesses within those strengths that you're unaware of because you're always
Well,
focused.
a and we as a species are designed to be adaptable.
Yes.
You know, we become stronger under greater stress physically. Sometimes not mentally, sometimes yes, but generally physically under greater stress we will become stronger. We are adaptable in that sense. And a lot of people who've gone through hardship become more emotionally hardened. They become more emotionally adaptable. People who've uh, moved around a lot, have had their life kind of mixed up a lot, they become more adaptable to new situations. Whereas people who've maybe lived in the same place their whole life, they're not as adaptable because they're a little bit more comfortable or
Yeah.
complacent.
Yep.
And I can certainly I've experienced that for sure at jobs or just in life in general. So when things get shook up a bit, it's nice because it reminds you what you're capable of as far as adaptation.
So, what I'm kind of hearing and what I agree with so far is that there's a strong correlation between free thinking or a open mind and adaptability on human terms. Yeah,
Yeah.
because we a lot of examples that we've talked about so far are what's breaking adaptability is rigidity, the inability to change or to which makes sense. It's kind of the opposite of adaptability is that.
Yeah.
So I have another quote. This one's from Gandhi, which I thought was really
Never heard
interesting.
of him.
Yeah, right. Adaptability is not imitation. It means power of resistance and assimilation. What I'm thinking, and get me
Interesting.
wrong, because it's the first time I've heard this quote, and I didn't have too much time to think on it, but it's maintaining yourself while again adapting or surviving within in this case it was societal and religious and cultural
Mhm.
pressures that he was very famous for opposing, and survived within them and changed the nation near with pacifism, two nations honestly, and three technically with England as well, but it's I just think that that's really interesting because he's talking about a specific type of rigidity being part of adaptability. And I do agree with that in that, like,
Yeah.
the point of adaptability is to survive as yourself, right? Like, that would be the whole reason is you want to survive. Not
Mhm.
the destruction of identity. It's almost growing into it's time, right? It grows you over time, and so you're adapting to that. Um, but anyway, I just thought that was an interesting angle for adaptability is that there is
Well,
some rigidity to it.
yeah, and I agree. I was gonna say earlier that if you become too malleable, that's a problem. Adaptability,
Yes.
yeah, I think yeah, because you don't call people who just sign up with anybody adaptable. You know, they're
Yes.
called turncoats or traitors or, traitors to themselves, really. They're too malleable. They're not an entity. They're not an individual.
Yeah, they're not
Yeah, so
adapting to the
adaptability is
situation. They're becoming part of the situation, right? They're borging,
yeah,
if you want to go to that, right? They're
yeah,
getting assimilated.
totally. I think yeah, proper adaptation is adjusting only what's necessary,
There you
I
go.
suppose, to fit into a new situation. Like going to a new school or meeting new kids
Uh,
or meeting a new group of people. There's an amount of adaptation that takes place. You have to sort of gauge people and take them as they are and see, oh, this is the energy, this is the okay, I can do these, this is what's comfortable here, this is okay. And I've definitely done that, and slowly I'll reveal more about my personality the more comfortable I get within a group of new people. But certainly I'll kind of, I think it's part of that masking up when you meet new people. You kind of put on the best face and you kind of adapt, and then with that sort of best face mask on, you try to get into the situation, and then as you adapt and as things become more comfortable, you can kind of peel back the layers and reveal some of yourself, a little bit more of yourself.
I,
That's kind of a healthy adaptability,
I
I would
think
say.
in social situations in particular,
Yeah.
adaptability is a give and take kind of deal, right? They give you a little, you give them a little, and so on and so forth, and then you adapt to
Yeah.
each other over time. It's not a I think you mentioned that earlier too. Adaptation can take place very, very quickly, but also, I mean, Charles Darwin was the first quote I talked about. It can take place over a very long period of time as well.
Yeah.
It's all relative.
And I have a couple of examples of some important adaptation, particularly in the creative realm,
Oh,
and how adapting to a situation that seems less than optimal can actually make the product better. The end
oh,
result might be better. And one example is Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
mm-hmm.
They wanted to ride real horses, but they didn't have the money. So they got a guy to bang a couple of coconuts together, and they pretended they were riding horses, and they kind of skipped along and held fake reins. And it's way funnier.
It's way
It's a
funnier.
joke that goes throughout the whole movie, way better than real horses, and it almost seems intentional.
And it
And
led to some great jokes. I mean, the whole swallow bit or the whole bird bit, like finding a coconut, came out of that.
yeah,
Just for
exactly.
that, and they don't show. I actually don't remember them seeing. The only time I might have seen a horse, and I might not have, is when the two peasants are calling out the king about not voting for him. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
and I think
Yeah, maybe
maybe a
there's a
horse was
donkey
pulling
or
pulling
something.
a cart, something like that. I remember, but like otherwise, it was just became a reality of that version of the King Arthur myth that they were putting
Yeah,
forward, and just part of the satire and part
yeah.
of the overall spirit of the film. And
And so
exactly,
instead of
so
throwing
much
in the
better.
towel, they
Yes,
adapted.
yes, absolutely, and that's a great example of artistic adaptation. No, no question.
And it made and that movie is iconic, and that's
Yes.
one of the reasons it's iconic. It wouldn't be as funny with real horses.
No.
Another example I thought of was regarding Eddie Van Halen.
Oh,
If you don't know, people, Eddie Van Halen, one of the greatest guitar players ever, electric guitar players
never
specifically,
heard
I
of
would
him.
say. But I'm sure, yeah, right. But I'm sure he could tear it up on acoustic. However, I haven't heard him play one. But
Oh.
he and his brother Alex Van Halen is the drummer of the band. When they were children, or younger, I guess maybe teenagers, a drum set and a guitar were purchased, and Eddie was going to drum, and Alex was going to play the guitar, and that was the setup. And Eddie Van Halen, he had a job. I think it was delivering papers or something, paper route. And while he was out delivering his papers, his brother was at home, and he ended up practicing on the drums instead of the guitar. And he got really good at the drums. So he came home one day, and his brother was playing on the drums, and he's apparently playing well. So he said, "Oh, well, I guess I'm going to play the guitar then." And now we have Eddie Van Halen and all his great music and the band and everything that they've done and all the guitar players he's influenced, and everything that's cascaded from that. And that was an adaptation. He didn't say, "Get the hell off the drums, Alex. This wasn't the deal. I'm going to play the drums." No, he adapted to the situation, and greatness occurred. So that's one of the beautiful things, is you never really know how things are supposed to turn out. Sometimes things not going according to plan is really great.
Oh, I 100% agree. I think it goes back to that too. If instead Eddie had leaned into, no, I'm supposed to play the drums, a whole different world,
Oh yeah,
in terms of music and just and how music affects. It's a whole different world. I mean that very broadly. Um, it's just one of those crazy things that, again, being willing to adapt and to grow, is a wonderful thing. Now, I don't want to pull off into this too far at the moment. Maybe it'll come up more later. But there are most definitely negative adaptations, right?
definitely. Yeah, and I have an example of one of those too. If we want to
Well,
start with positive and move into negative a little later, that's up to you though.
let's do it. We got here. If you have an example, let's start with that. We'll go from there.
Well, this one's a bit of a spoiler
Okay.
for anybody who hasn't read Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, which Cody gifted me,
I
and I
did.
just completed reading. So, spoilers for the ending of that. If you haven't read it, just note that there are spoilers. So,
Yes.
in this
If
story,
you've just
there
seen the
is
film, this is something completely different as well.
yeah, I'm there's no way they could fit this story into a movie.
No.
It'd be like 6 movies.
Yeah.
No, maybe not that much. But so essentially, there's this forest that's creating these spores, and it's creating this miasma, and it's toxic to humans. You can't breathe it; it'll kill you. And this whole time, they're struggling against this. They have to wear masks, and they have to really avoid this. And it's a whole big part of the plot. Eventually, you find out that what this forest is actually doing is purifying this polluted planet, because it's this apocalyptic world where everything was destroyed in the 7 days of fire, and it's just pollution run rampant. Man has wrecked the earth, and these forests, the sea of corruption, as they call it, is actually purifying the world, and is purifying the air. And mankind has adapted to the poisonous world so much that if they breathe in this purified air, they will vomit up blood and it will kill them. So, what greater example of a negative
Yes.
adaptation? I
Yes.
just finished
Well,
this day before yesterday, and what perfect time.
well, and a positive adaptation for the Sea of Corruption, but negative for how people adapted to this new change was the animal life, in particular insect life, because I believe that's the only. It's not the only, because we've got the little fox cat, and there's the chocobo looking things, and there's a few more recognizable creatures, I guess I'd say, more something familiar from what we'd feel like was an old world, compared to the Omu and these guardians of this sea, so that they're
Giant insects.
yes, that are basically protecting this place from humanity so it can do its work. Um, it's just that, and that was an adaptation of life. And again, we were talking about Charles Darwin. I mean, that's not all evolution feels so guided, but sometimes it does feel quite guided. Whether or not that's true, and it's just time manifesting or not, but it's a heck of a thing. And I do highly recommend folks read that. I need to read it again so badly, but that is a yeah. That's exactly is it. And I think another one too, if we want to go maybe socio-political, we have adapted so strongly to the systems we've built, we cannot imagine things differently. And so we've
Yeah.
tried one other option, and it was not great. And so we just kind of accept our lot. And I think that is a very poor adaptation. In fact, that's almost the opposite of adaptation, or what it should be.
Complacency. I think
Yeah,
too much it becomes complacency.
there you go. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a fair amount of that become yeah, being too adaptable, being too malleable, being too open to and not being not then you just become part of the mass like we said
yeah.
before.
It's not so much adapting to it, because adapting is changing yourself to survive, not so much changing to something else. Trying to phrase that correctly from what I'm getting, but because
It's
it
I
does
think it's not
mean
so much changing yourself, it's just adjusting to the circumstances while maintaining yourself. It's adjusting to circumstances while maintaining individuality.
there you go. Because
I think that's a proper adaptation where you're not going too far one way or the other.
yeah, yeah, that covers it. Um, because yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
oh well, another thought I had, I think this is important about pursuing goals.
Oh,
Is that if I wrote this, having a desire to achieve something or having a pursuit will make you adaptable. And this is the old where there's a will, there's a way expression. Oftentimes I've been caught in situations where I didn't really care how things come out, so I didn't really try that hard because I didn't really have a will to see it through. But when I do have a will to see it through, you're constantly thinking. If a problem comes up, you're thinking of ways around it. You're thinking, oh, if this doesn't work, we can do this instead. Oh, we can move this to here. We can do it on this day if that doesn't work. You become way more adaptable if you really have a goal in mind and a pursuit that you're focused on because
wait.
that will comes in.
Well, that's another. interesting link between rigidity and adaptability again, right? Because you're being stubborn towards something, but it's so specific that everything
Yeah.
else around it can move, right?
Yeah, it's about having a specific goal, but not being so hung up on how it's achieved.
Yes. I think, yeah, absolutely. And what I was kind of visualizing when we talk about that is it's walking the path no matter which way it goes because you know the end of the path, right?
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
And I agree 100%. I think even biologically, for ever, the big star, the big goal has been survival, right? And so we've seen it manifest in so many different ways, all these different adaptations and just ways of living within ourselves and the human race, but also in all life that we've ever come
Yeah, and
across.
that makes me think of, have you seen these cats? I forgot what they had. There's a specific, disorder that these cats have, and they call them wobbly cats.
Oh, okay. I think I
Where
know it.
and I
Yeah.
I think what happens is usually it's like the mother is sick during pregnancy, with a specific, disease or virus or something, and essentially it just affects their, I think their cerebral, what am I trying to say? Their cerebellum.
Mm,
So something it would basically they're just really wobbly. They walk kind of shaky
yeah.
and they just don't have good balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I saw this clip of this cat who is one of these wobbly cats, and apparently this is a couple that cruises around and they live out of their camper and they go all these places. And the cats climbed up the side of this mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's up there and they're like, "Oh my god, what are you doing?" And then it climbs down all, wobbly and
Uh-huh.
shaky. And the first thing I thought was like, yeah, it's because it's an animal. Animals don't think in those terms. They don't think in
No.
the terms of, "Oh, I have this ailment. I
Oh
can't
God,
do
no.
this." They just
No.
function as they normally would. Those instincts keep them going. And it's great. It's a beautiful thing
No,
because, and I've seen
absolutely.
people do that too.
Yes.
But as people, our awareness gets in the way of our adaptability
No, it's very
because
true.
you're told, oh, here we go. Tom Petty, famously, he got pissed off one day in the recording studio, punched the wall, broke his hand, went to the doctor. Doctor said, "You're never gonna play guitar again, buddy."
Uh-huh.
And Tom Petty was on stage when he was telling this story. He's like, "Yeah, playing his guitar,"
Uh-huh.
because he, obviously he didn't agree. He didn't listen to that reality. He kept pushing forward, and he adapted.
I know.
Maybe he had to play guitar differently.
Yep. Another famous one is Tony Iommi.
Yep.
Cut off the tips of, I think, most of the fingers on his fretting hand, and
Yeah.
almost gave up, tried to learn it as it was, and instead he found, I forgot the story behind how he figured out how the like specific type of leather he wanted for the fingertips to be
He
able to
just
fret again.
experimented.
I think that was it. There was somebody who inspired him. It was some other guy who, again, he worked with metal, which is funny as shit. But
Yeah.
yeah, he was a metal worker when he did that. So I think it was in that where it's not a safe profession.
Well,
Most
what
factory
happened
work isn't.
was
Yeah, go for
it
it.
was his last day, and the guy who usually cut the metal was gone, so they had him
That
cutting the
was
metal,
it. That was
and he cut his fingertips off.
it. Yep.
But he adapted, like you said.
Hmm.
He got the, he worked with different types of leather or whatever,
Yeah.
would grip strings, but also he really helped to develop thinner string gauges for guitars.
Oh, I didn't know that
He went
actually.
and found, like, I think mandolin strings or other strings like that, and would put those on his guitar, whatever he could find that was smaller, thinner, easier to fret, easier to play. So I think he was part of that, developing that
Yeah.
technology, I guess,
Yeah.
of
Totally.
just thinner strings.
Well, and it gave a sound, I'm sure, that people were like, oh, okay, and then they figured it out. So one of the
Yeah.
beautiful things about artistic adaptation is when something so unique hits the market in terms of sound, something amazing and powerful, and I'll say Sabbath was one of those. I absolutely believe
Oh
that.
yeah.
Uh, then the entire market adapts and grows, learns from, and becomes something completely different. And that came from a physical adaptation, and of course, an adaptation to three other interesting bandmates and all the times that they were living in and the things they were doing.
Right. And it drastically affected the sound of his
Yes.
guitar when he played, and his and it
Yes.
I it so it had an impact, a huge impact on the sound of the band.
Absolutely. And that's just a small one. And again, then even small adaptations within individuals and their art can cause massive waves of adaptation within society and within the planet. We were talking about Gandhi again as well. That's another one. Change the planet and perspectives from adapting to a heck of a situation. Um, and another one that's kind of dark, but has proven time and time again to be quite useful is any kind of military style adaptation. The battlefield is constant adaptation. Um,
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
yeah, because within life or death situations, period, you have to adapt to survive. It brings us back to that. You were talking about the animals. They don't think in those terms because their main goal, their star, their path hasn't changed much. It's still just survival and living. Um,
Yeah, and that's I really love seeing that because
yes,
yeah, and you see people who do the same thing, who are
absolutely.
who are born with issues or have accidents or injuries that create these problems for them, and then they don't think about it. It's a non-issue.
Yep.
They still pursue life. Like my mom. My mom's one of those
Yes,
people.
absolutely.
Born with a heart condition, told she was never would have children, told she wouldn't do all these sorts of things, and she just kind of did them. You know, it's
exactly.
funny. It's been a problem sometimes where I'm like, Mom, you shouldn't be doing this. Like, why'd you
Uh,
do that? But if my mom was not the person she is, I wouldn't be here. So I
exactly.
really have no place to complain, and I only have place to complain because she is who she is. So
Yes, and you've adapted to that as well. Um,
yes, and she's adapted to that and
yes.
continues to adapt, and yeah, it's one of our greatest strengths. One thought that I had that is kind of a weakness of ours is addiction is a sort of
It
adaptability.
is. Yeah.
We just get so used to a situation or the intake of a certain chemical that we just get addicted to it, and that's a form of adaptation. Just like being used to being in a bad situation, and so you just stick in that bad
Yeah, it's
situation.
a mental adaptation, and it's also the worst one, and what makes it so difficult almost. And I think because it fuels the mental bit of it is the biological adaptation. Your
Right,
body ends up being like, oh, okay, I need this, or I need to stop. I don't need to produce it, or it's equivalent myself anymore. That's a big
right.
one. In fact,
Mhm.
it doesn't even have to be chemicals. We bring this up a lot on this, and of course, it's slightly ironic because we are on a social media platform, but these screens and all of that are absolutely monsters for that, and we
Oh, they're huge.
are adapting to this, and our generations are having to adapt to the big monster of the internet and this giant collective consciousness, quote unquote, that we've birthed far quicker than humanity has had to adapt to many other big changes.
Well, think about this. Like we've adapted to not seeing our friends as often, and
Uh-huh.
we just talk to them on screens. You
Yeah.
know, we've adapted to that. We've become. It's convenient. Convenience is the death
Convenience.
of all things. That is people will give up anything for convenience, and it's rough. It's rough,
Convenience
but
and
yeah,
safety. Yep, it's those two
yeah.
kill life. But it certainly makes life easier. I'll give them that. But that's the whole
It's
point.
convenient.
Yep. Uh, but yeah, and those adaptations. Oh, I guess what's the relationship? And I think we've kind of been talking about this, but the relationship between adaptability and you're saying complacency. I'm going to use the word acceptance instead.
Mhm.
I think acceptance is the first step to adaptability, but it's your perception on that acceptance that changes it from a positive to a negative adaptation.
I see what you're
Because you
saying.
have to acknowledge that something needs to change or is changing before you can adapt to
Yeah,
it.
and do you see it as an opportunity, or
Yes.
do you see it as a burden?
Yeah, right. And that's, I think it's the perception of that acceptance that leads to the kind of adaptability you find yourself manifesting, I guess would be the word. Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
I just think that's interesting. It's
So was there a question in that?
no, it's just a thought.
Oh,
It
okay,
was just
because
a
I
thought
I
to
was
explore. It's one of those things that we've come across quite a few on this, where once again it's a tool, right? It's how
yeah.
you use it that matters. And I think that's the If it was a tool like a wrench, it's what's gripping the bolt, right, and which way you're turning it.
Mm.
That's just a thought in general.
Yeah, well, and on our previous cast when we were talking about my dad, and he forced me to become adaptable to new situations as far as figuring out how to handle things, and it obviously being adaptable doesn't mean you have an encyclopedia in your head that gives you the answers every time you come into a new situation. You don't know how to solve it, but it gives you the ability to remain calm and be cognizant and function and think it through. And if you're used to being put in new situations that you haven't been in before, that's a muscle that becomes strong. You've used it. You've been in situations you haven't been in before, so you know the process in which to find a solution.
I agree entirely. I think on that note, and I think since the first one, I've mentioned this individual many times, but there's another individual who people would be probably more familiar with these days, talking about the importance of fluidity in thought and action. We have I found a lot of Miyamoto Musashi's quotes quite relevant. The one that's stuck in the back of my head forever is kind of relevant to adaptability. Is You must understand there is more than one path up the mountain. Um, but also Bruce Lee, and when he was describing the martial art, he found a Jeet Kune Do. Uh, uh, Apply what is useful, discard what is useless. Both of those
Mhm.
are adaptabilities, and within trying to maintain again your goal, both of those are speaking about goals, right? It's you can only find what is useful by having a goal. What is otherwise again your perspective is lost. You have nothing to compare it to, and knowing that you have more than one way to get to some place is another way to allow you to adapt. Maybe you started up a path towards your goal, it's not working anymore, but if you start up
Mhm.
another one, you're still heading up towards that goal, right?
Yeah,
um,
and that's what we'd spoken about earlier. It's just it's not it's about it's about achieving what you wanted to achieve. It's not about how you achieve it.
yes.
Obviously, you don't want to bring balance to the force by becoming Darth Vader. You know, that
Right.
matters how you achieve that, but
Yeah.
if that was the path, so be it. But we don't want to all become Darth Vader
Mm-hmm.
to achieve our goals. So there's a balance to be had in it does matter to a degree how you achieve your goal, but don't get so dead set on one way to achieve it. That's the trick of it. Don't get dead set on the one way because
Yes.
and we've talked about this before. This is a common, this is a reoccurring thing.
Yep.
There's so many people who want to if they want to draw comics or whatever, they want to wait till they have the expensive materials, maybe the
Yeah.
right paper, the inks. If you want to play guitar, you don't want to play till you can buy a $3,000 Gibson.
Uh-huh.
If this is the wrong way. You start with whatever you have and go from there. That is the right path is starting.
Yep. Yep, and that's the bit too. That you start somewhere, and again, it might only take you so far, and then you may have to abandon that path and start a new one.
Yeah,
But as long as that goal is that important, that should give you the will to carry on, no matter what again hurdles you must adapt around. Um,
and here's another example of a famous person doing just that.
oh,
Uh, if for those of you who aren't familiar, James Cagney, famous actor
yeah,
in the 30s and into the 60s, but really his heyday was like the 30s and through the 50s. Famously, he played gangsters in a lot of movies, and he was great at it. He was loved for it. He became iconic for playing these gangster roles. Now, James Cagney is famously quoted as saying, "I'm a song and dance man." And that's really the antithesis of his image for most people. So he was getting fed up of just playing these gangster roles in all these movies. He and his brother founded a company and they started making their own films, and they didn't do very well. They made a couple films and they didn't do that well. So James Cagney, not being too prideful, he went back to Warner Brothers and he's like, let's do another gangster movie because he needed to make some money. He knew where the money was and he knew how to achieve what he needed to achieve. And he didn't have too much pride to go back and do that. He went off on his own venture with his brother. He tried, it didn't work. He went back to what works. He went back to the well. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. And if somebody as iconic as James Cagney can do it, anybody should do or be willing to do that.
I agree, and I think the longer a artist's career, the more I want to see both what they prove themselves on, as well as what they wanted to try to grow, and I want to see that uh, integrate, right? I want to see that mix, those in music. I want to see different. I'm a big progressive type of music fan. I love different genres blending. I love all of these things, and what I've noticed in most of the bands I really like is as their catalog grew and as time went on, they never stopped adapting to the scene and trying different things, but they also never stopped doing what they knew they were good at.
Mm,
They never really stopped their
yeah.
footing. But they were never afraid to step off of that footing and try something a little different. And that applies to so many different works. It applies to comics. It applies to music. It applies to, uh,
Well,
well, anything, honestly.
this makes me think of something play.
Mm.
When you play as children, there's a lot of adaptability going on
Yes.
because the imagination is running wild, the rules
Yes.
change, the reality of the situation changes. So if we could approach things more playfully,
Yes.
I think we would do a lot better at adapting because we don't have to see everything as so dire, you know?
Yes.
It might feel that way. I know sometimes earlier on when I was working on music, it felt very dire that this be this certain way and it sound this certain way and it go exactly like this. And that's just it's just a road to frustration and disappointment.
Oh,
Whereas if you're willing to be more fluid and be a little bit more playful and be a little bit more open, it's gonna be you're gonna be better off. Example, I'm currently working on some recordings with a producer friend of mine, and throughout the process, you notice things that happen during the recording, like oh, this you could hear this on this mic, so we're gonna have to fix that. We're gonna have to adjust to it. So I don't want to tell too many stories ahead of time, but the idea is that instead of just being upset by these mistakes or just trying to delete them or having to re-record everything, it's a matter of adapting. What can we do to sort of hide this mistake? How can we make this interesting while making the mistake, while covering the mistake? It's essentially like a Rembrandt band-aid. It's an artistic cover-up of a problem.
I agree. So on play, and it just reminded me of a Carl Jung quote. So I wanted to look it up real quick.
Hmm.
The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct arising from inner necessity. The creative
Hmm.
mind plays with the object it loves. Um, and
Yeah, that's
just again, not taking it too seriously. You're enjoying it. You're playing with it. Again, you're throwing it around. You're adapting to it and figuring it out, right?
Yeah, and that's an important thing for me certainly in my music, and that's really what my goal was when I became Laguna Moonta. And that's what the song Laguna Moonta is about. It's about creative freedom. It's about trying new things. It's about exploring that territory that has you haven't explored before and not being pigeonholed and not pigeonhole yourself into a certain genre or style, doing whatever you want, having fun with it. It should be a playground. Whatever your art is, it should be a playground. It's a sandbox with your action figures. You know,
Absolutely.
it's supposed to be fun.
So I have an Einstein quote, which was the original one I thought of, but when I typed in, I couldn't find it. So I was like, okay, there's a young one, but I found it.
Hmm.
Creativity is intelligence at play. That's the one I was looking
Yeah.
for, and I absolutely agree. To create something new, you have to be juggling a lot of different things in your mind, and again, enjoying it. Very little creativity comes joylessly.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's good. There are good things that come out of sorrow.
Yes.
Great creativity does come out of sorrow and sadness. Not to say that the whole like Chuck is out of sorrow, it's out
Hmm.
of sadness. It's about losing my father, but the process wasn't that.
There you go.
The process of making the album. I waited long enough to do it to where the process was this play. It was this it was this fun. It was just an experience. I just did it. And a lot of the great things that came out of that album were when I was in the flow, when I would write the lyrics and then I'd go to my piano or to my guitar and there was the song. I've never had songs come so easily to me because my mind was just so open to whatever, because I wasn't constraining myself. I said this album it's going to be whatever it's going to be. It's going to be this weird cosmic space opera thing. That could be anything, because what exists in space? Everything. And so that really helped me because I wasn't pigeonholing myself. I was very adaptable to whatever came to me.
That's what I was gonna get to when you were mentioning that is adaptability. I think we've there's another bit it's come up quite a few times, the relationship between art and this flow state. Folks who have seen the Pixar movie Soul, that has a really good description of it for folks who aren't always artistically inclined, and so you might not recognize it the same way. I'm sure you experience it in many other things. I do doing physical labor, for instance. I'll go into a flow state, but it's I think the flow state is for one, it's consistently living in that moment, which I think by doing that, by getting closer to existing on time's terms, I guess is the best way to put it, you are in a constant state of adaptability
I like that.
with
Yeah, I
with
think
with
that's
a
true.
goal in mind, right? For me, it's physical labor or any artistry, things like that, where you're trying to make something. You have that goal, you have that path that we've been talking about, or at least the goal at the end of the path, but you're working towards it near effortlessly, quote unquote. It doesn't the mental effort isn't the same, I guess is the best way to put
It's
it.
it becomes a dance.
There you go. That's
And the
it, dance, because
partner
there's still
and the
effort,
partner
but yeah.
is this invisible force that you're playing with, that you just when it pushes, you receive, and then you push and it goes
Yes.
back. And that's I had an experience like that writing a song recently. Pardon me. Um, I uh, I was writing a song for about 3 hours, and I was playing it over and over again, working out the chords, coming up with it was just chords I've never played before. So it was a great time of discovery for me. And when I was done, I didn't really remember what had happened. I almost couldn't remember how the song went. Luckily, I had filmed myself playing a few of the chords, so I had the rhythm down and I had the kind of cadence, but I couldn't really remember what had
Mm-hmm.
happened. And I think that's a good sign that you were there, you were in the
Yes.
right place, you were focused. But I have a question for you,
Oh.
because I've heard you speak on this before, and it has a lot to do with your day job,
Uh,
adaptability. You were talking about, oh, if a dog does this, you have to flow and you have to move and you have to be this kind.
oh man, so yeah, working
Speak
with
on that.
so animals in general, right? We're talking about that. They have their very specific goal, which is their overarching goal. It's the goal of all life. I mean, from bacteria to us, right? It's the goal of all life, which is survival. That's the main goal. They are biologically, you hurt when you're hungry, right? Like there is literal, definitive, experiential things that happen to you to push you towards trying to live. Um, so but they that's what they exist in. They're very very moment to moment. They do log important memories and events. You'll find trauma in particular logs very deeply within these critters, and they do not adapt to it that great. um, they can exist in it and live in it, and they can grow away from it, but it's like any people as well. It's there, it doesn't go.
Yeah.
You adapt around it. Trauma in particular is a big one. But dog language is unique to each animal. There are similarities to how they're, I'm going to use the term, talking to you. Their body languages and things. There's similarities, but imagine a human that's born and they have to, each human having to develop their own language, right, to communicate. There is a connection between
Which
dogs and they have their
which we
bit.
do in a
It's
sense,
true.
but we
It's
do have a common language between us, which is fortunate.
Yes, and for dogs as well within packs, there are commonalities, but you will find two dogs that do not speak the same language, just like you find two people who do not.
Right.
And when it's a species barrier as well, then
Right.
there's a lot of adapting and learning that individual and learning how to communicate with that individual. And there's certain human, and I'm gonna call it human, but certain expressions that uh, all sentient life experience, and that's the adaptations that you have to learn to communicate with. There's certain bases. The most common one that I try and really show by example because it's so fucking helpful and it's a safety thing. Some people it depends on the terms, but a non-dangerous dog. I'm not talking about something that's growling and foaming at the fucking mouth. I'm talking about something that maybe has not had a good day for a long time. Things like that. A tall human, and most of us are tall, walking up to it is going to terrify the fuck out of it. You shrink yourself down, they understand those terms and they're far more open very quickly. We as children probably feel that as well. My childhood's a blur, but I'm sure I did experience that of a large adult over me and scaring the shit out of me because of the size
Oh yeah.
difference. That's a universal connection that you can apply to dogs, and then they become more open or to nearly any animal. I do it with cats. Any kind of creature where you're just massive and hovering over them, and we're a very unique species in that we are a straight up vertical line. It's a very intimidating form to most things which are long, but that
And low to the ground.
and low to the ground exactly.
But I've heard you, and this is what I really wanted you to get at is
Okay,
I've heard you speak about how you have to really flow with them
so
when you're engaging with them
let
because
it can get dangerous. There's a large
right.
animal, a lot of puppies,
So
for
this is about
instance.
your adaptability is what I wanted to get in because you're obviously very adaptable
Well, and
to work with them.
so for me also, so this is a physical thing. This is about it's taught in martial arts as well. It's just that flow, so that when you're hit, you're moving with the hit instead of taking it like a brick wall, right? Like it's the
Mhm.
same kind of concept. With some dogs, they get big and they never really learned how to play on human terms. So when they're trying to get a hold of you and their main grasping implement is full of sharp objects, you have to learn not to resist that, because if you resist that, then they want to play tug of war. They want
Yeah.
to grab a hold of it. They want to. That's the thing dogs really love too, is strength. But this exchange of well, it's the same thing. We love that too. It's why we do wrestling, we do UFC,
Mhm.
we do those things. It's that exchange of strength in a it's a very masculine bit, but I think ladies
Totally.
can as well, because there's whole genres of that where
Oh
it's
yeah.
exchanges of strength. It's just different terms maybe, but that's something that they enjoy, and so they think you're doing this one thing and resisting them, so they think it's play. They don't mean to hurt you. They don't understand on that level. They're almost in a constant flow state, just by existence. Again, they're moving from one thing
Yeah.
to one
In the
thing.
moment.
Exactly, and so they're just, oh, resistance, boom. So if you don't and you flow, you have enough time to not only not get hurt, because I, in my years of working with dogs, I have not come across one that wanted to hurt me. That's never been a thing. They don't want that. They want this exchange. They're either trying to tell you something very directly, or they're trying to play. And that's usually the
Mhm.
two cases that dangerous things happen. There's some very dumb people. I've come across that, and they've been saved by a dog not being so dumb. But
Yeah, got lucky.
exactly, by the dog listening to the vibe as well. But that's not always going to be the case, because of how they think is differently. But for me, that's been key, and it's also just how I figure out how to talk to that individual. And it's the same thing I apply to people or to any social situation. It's a very similar basis that I build whatever interaction on. It's that exchange between self and other that's also come up here. Is I have to adapt to the other. I don't feel I need to force myself to have them adapt to me. That's my kind of work though, and I like
Well, and you're
figuring
you're
people out
establishing
like
a
that.
relationship.
That's
You're
also
establishing a it's not like you ran
yes,
into a wild dog in the street and you have
exactly.
to scare it away from you so it doesn't
Yes,
attack you. At that point,
yes,
yeah,
yeah. It's a
get
different
big,
deal.
get scary, get
Yes.
it away from you. I've been in that situation where I've had to scare, and I
Hmm.
knew if I took a step back, this dog was gonna maul me.
No, that's a bit too. So I just watched something on African wild dogs, and it ended up going to hyenas. But the main thing is they were trying to take down a bull. God, they're those African oxes. I think they're a type of ox. I can't think of it. But if it had
Oh,
actually stood its ground for 5 or 10 minutes, those hyenas would have let it alone. Instead, it did start freaking out and started to run, and that was it.
yeah,
It didn't
yeah,
it
and that's
didn't adapt to the situation to stand its
well,
ground because it
exactly.
could.
That's another form of
Yeah.
adaptability because that's a great thing about it too is being put in those situations. It's one of those things where it shows your true colors,
Hmm.
when you're thrown into those chaotic or dangerous situations. I've surprised myself with how I've reacted because you would think, oh, I'm a guy who would react this way. Some
Uh-huh.
guys are like, oh, if this would happen, this is what I'd tell you, bro. This is the first thing I would do. Okay, I'd assess the
Yeah.
situation and I'd handle it. And maybe they would, but maybe they
Maybe.
run off screaming, you know?
Yep.
And my I wouldn't assume that I would react to a dog and stand up to it. I didn't think that that would be my reaction,
Yeah.
but I did. And in the moment, as I was doing it, I realized, yes, this is the right course of action. Don't back up. Don't back down from this. It was almost instinct. Instinct happened, and then I adapted to my instinctual reaction and followed through.
Well, and that goes back to our other bit is again most animals' key bit is survival, so they are constantly assessing threat versus reward.
Yeah,
And so that's the big one
and we are
is
animals.
yep, no, and that's the same for us too, right? Like that can change somebody's mood very drastically whether they see you as a threat or something they can gain something out of, right? And can
Yeah.
change that drastically. And how we adapt to those situations and utilize them and flow with them is key to survival. Again, it's that tool, and you have to be able to perceive it correctly to be able to get the outcome that you desire. I guess is the best way, because I don't like to use that should happen, but it's kind of that mode. Uh, that
Right.
that one gets a little bit more philosophical, but um, that's key. And within my work with animals, that's been a bit. The biggest play group of dogs I ever ran was 25 dogs crammed in far less. What would it be like? Maybe 100 by 125 foot yard. That's well, that would
A
be
lot of
four
dogs.
dogs per 10 feet or something like that, or per 5 feet. Oh my god, it was a lot of dogs, and the fact that they were able to adapt and be fine in that situation because I was able to help them communicate is why that situation didn't end poorly. Uh,
Hmm.
it's being able to flow and understand that, and again, the other reason why is because most animals do not they don't kill with a desire to hurt. They kill with a desire to survive. There's a big difference. I have never come across like a malicious dog. It's not a thing that I am aware of. Cujo's supposed to be like that, right? But
Well, he's rabid.
that's the thing, and that's
It's not
a
even his
terrible
fault.
brain. Exactly, and it's a terrible
That
brain
movie's so
disease.
tragic because you just feel bad for everybody involved.
Yep.
The dog, the family, it's all
Yep.
bad.
It's all bad, and so
Totally
that's
depressing.
the bit. Now there are some animals that are absolutely malicious. We're probably the top cheese on that, but under us are many other apes. Baboons are actively malicious. Sometimes, again, with territorial disputes, that can be survival, but there's also a certain level of bloodlust is another cross species language. That's one that many of us, many living things speak. Um, but within my work, and particularly because of how many, God, it's been almost like 30,000 years of dogs adjusting to us and us adjusting dogs and adjusting to dogs, that we are very closely like it's not like I'm trying to talk to a wolf. There's a big difference. This is something that generations upon generations have lived with people, and they have an understanding of how we operate at a genetic level at this point. As well as we have a certain memory of that, as well as our ancestors interacting with those creatures. It's I can't take credit. I just adapted to it and utilize it.
Yeah, and that's the thing is you're able to do that and be aware of it and think about it and it forces you to be aware,
Yes.
being in that situation with these living beings, and
Yep.
it forces you to adapt
Yep.
because every day you have to adapt to the new personality
Yeah.
that you're encountering.
Yeah, and every day it's something different with the same personality in many
And it's
cases too.
different. I mean, obviously there are people who you have
Yes.
to do that with,
Yes.
but people aren't as likely to murder you.
Right. That's the bit.
Maybe in a
Yeah.
society, you're not as likely to get bit by a person, not murdered. You're not as likely
Yeah.
to get bit by a person as you are by a dog that maybe is injured
Yep.
or sick or was abused.
Yeah.
You know, people are abused, people are sick,
Yeah.
people are injured, but there's that social barrier that we've
Yeah, we
kind
call
of
it
established.
social contract,
It gets
right? Yeah.
crossed,
Oh, absolutely.
but certainly it's not as likely to happen as it is with animals.
No,
So
and it's
you
the
have to be more adaptable.
and it's kind of the same between being person to person animal as well. It takes both ends to not adapt and to be rigid and to force each other into that violent conflict. Takes a lot.
Yeah, both sides kind of have to fail at adapting
Yes,
or communicating in an effective manner.
exactly.
There's another quote I was going to try to find here. I don't know if I have it saved. It's a good one. And this recent chain of thought made me think of it. I wonder if I have it. It was one I saved some time ago, just because I enjoy it, and I
I
thought it
do that as
was
well. Yeah.
I thought it rang true. Let's see. If you have other thoughts,
Yeah.
you can share
No.
them while I'm searching.
I
Oh,
mean,
found it.
oh, there you go.
Civilized men are more discourteous than savages because they know they can be impolite without having their skulls split. And that's Robert E. Howard
Yeah,
through Conan the Barbarian.
I've come across that one quite a bit as well.
Great quote, and
Particularly,
it's so true.
it comes up particularly with Second Amendment talk. That's the big one. That
That
I,
makes sense.
yeah, that's where I come across it because of how politicized everything is, and nothing can just be a thought. But nonetheless, I get that. That's it's what I think the more modern equivalent is fuck around and find out. Um,
Right.
um,
Yeah, and obviously, if you lived in Conan's world,
yep.
you'd adapt to not saying stupid shit to strangers
Yes.
because they would cleave your skull to the teeth.
Well, in our at least in our world as well. I mean, Vikings, that was a big thing. Hospitality was massively important. It was, and
Makes
we find
sense.
that
Show
in the Middle
respect.
East as well, where survival environments where survival is key. Not only are you showing the respect, but you're also continuing a tradition. Whereas if you find yourself in a similar situation, you let that guy into your home to not die in the blizzard. Well, maybe you're
Yeah.
that guy someday. And it was this
And
greater cultural perspective built around their gods and all these different things that would
right.
reward or punish it that allowed these societies to foster
And it's the
or
same thing we were speaking
prosper.
about earlier, but what we were speaking about was on a smaller scale,
Mm.
where it's like getting a new job
Yes.
or meeting a new group of people. It's the same thing
Yeah.
where you put on that polite. It's not necessarily a put on, because maybe some people are impolite, but I am polite, but I am maybe will say things that are crass or abrasive. They might seem rude, so I will definitely filter and be a little bit more, you know, I'll just try to speak a little bit less, a little less cursing, a little less slang, maybe. Just kind of really just try to put
Well,
my best foot
yeah.
forward.
There's a societal standard I think we learn as children, particularly because we need to talk to adults in a specific way.
Right, exactly. With respect, the idea is
Yes.
that's how you speak with respect,
Yes.
and that's something that's kind of degrading. And I don't know if that's an adaptation or not, but we were out at a restaurant, and this guy had ordered his food. He was sitting down at his table, and one of the kids, he's definitely a kid, teenager kid, was working behind the counter. He came out and he addressed the guy, um, and my thoughts, if I was working, I would, if what I don't know what he had to say to this guy. Probably had to tell him something about his order or whatever. But if it was me, I would have walked out from behind the counter. I would have said, "Oh, excuse me, sir. Just so you know, we're out of green chili. We can't give you a green chili order.
Oh.
Whatever."
Uh huh.
But this guy comes out and he goes, yo, bro, and like walks up to him and starts talking to him like that. And it's just kind of, it seemed to me a faux pas. It's just not how you treat kind of, that's if that works for him, fine, but it's certainly not how I was taught to engage with strangers, especially in a business setting where I am working for the business and they are the customer.
I get that. What you remind me when you're talking about the just because I just learned the name of the song, it's the Who song "Eminence Front." Um, that term I never really heard. I always thought the song was, it's a put on or what have you when you use that term.
Mm,
And thinking about the title of that song, I never learned the name of it or what the guy was saying until I was like, oh, it came up on my thing. I was like, oh, that's what it's called. And then I was just thinking eminence front. It's what you're putting out in front of you as your standard, right? As your
yes.
baseline. And so when they're saying about put on, it's a fake bit, and they don't always have to be a put on. It can still just be a again your eminence front.
Right, because I've
Your
seen
baseline.
fake and I've seen the quote eminence front. I've
Yeah.
seen that, and I've seen fake also.
And so it's different for everybody. For that guy, whatever culture he bit it was in, maybe that more familiar tone serves him greater, right? Because maybe it's a closer knit
Maybe he knew
culture
the
he grew
guy. I
up,
don't know.
right? You don't know, but also in some circumstances, absolutely, that'd be weird as shit. You know,
Right,
having
right,
some guy like maybe slap my back and be like, "Yo, what's up?" And I don't know the guy, right? Like
right,
it's not this is a whole different thing. But
right. A little too friendly.
different cultures have different eminence fronts. They have different baselines in which to interact. You go to Japan or China, the eminence front is extreme. You're getting far more of the
Right.
cultural eminence front than the individual's eminence
And
front.
that'd be an adaptation. You'd have to
Yes,
deal with that.
that's a
And
massive
there's
one.
one more adaptation. I guess I'll mention, and this is more of a popular one. Yeah, people will have seen this. It's in the first part of the Dune films, part one.
Oh,
Um, if you're not familiar, there's a group of people that live in the desert. They're called the Fremen, and on Arrakis, water is very scarce. That's the name of the planet, Dune, and so water is very precious. So anyway, Stilgar, the leader of the Fremen, or one of the leaders of the Fremen, goes to visit the Duke of Arrakis. This is their first meeting. The Duke seeks to make an alliance with the Fremen because he believes that they're the power on Arrakis, and he wants to have an alliance with them, whereas previous people have only subjugated them. He meets Stilgar, and he tells him that, I respect the personal dignity of anybody who respects mine. And Stilgar, he's like, he thinks about that, and he spits on the table. And the Duke's right hand man, he goes for his sword right away. And one of the Duke's men, Duncan Idaho, who had spent time with the Fremen, who had actually been kind of their liaison, he was sent ahead to learn about the Fremen. He had spent time with them. He goes, wait, 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 hold on. And he says, "We thank you, Stilgar, for the gift of your body's moisture. We accept it, in the way it was given, something like that." And he spits on the table, and then the Duke kind of he picks up on it and he
yeah.
spits on the table as well because again they're adapting to this new situation. Water is very
Yes.
precious on Arrakis, so if a man spits on your table, he's giving up water from his body, precious water from his body. Anywhere else, that's an insult, but here on this planet, it's a sign of great respect. So the Duke trusted his people. He looked at the situation and he adapted to it.
Yes. And again, I think to bring it a little bit back to the beginning, a key to adaptability is having an open mind. Um,
Yes.
uh, but when you were mentioning that, it reminded me of a quote about Diogenes, but it doesn't. The quote doesn't apply, but Diogenes very much does. He's an
Is this the
individual.
guy who only had the bowl?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, he only had a cup, and then he saw a kid drinking out of a well with his hands, and was like, "Oh shit!" And he got rid of his cup. He's
I
like,
love
"Oh,
it.
I don't even need that." But he forced a society to adapt to him, and refused to adapt. He called him Diogenes the dog. It's also another reason I like him. But it's what is it? It's because I bite curs and I nuzzle those who take care of me, something like that.
Mm,
His way of life was rather disgusting. But uh, there's so many great stories about this individual. If you want a good time on a philosopher, just look up Diogenes, folks. You'll have quite a few chuckles and a lot of thoughts. Very interesting probably the most interesting philosopher in my eyes. Not everything I agree with, but very unique individual. But he was authentically himself to the point that a society adapted around him to learn from him and respect it, because what they saw again was somebody so willing to shed off society that they could only respect it. It was a hell of a thing. Again, the court system adapted to him. He made, God, I don't remember. I think it was Plato, but it could be any. It was Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates are in a line, and I'm not sure which one of them time wise, but had defined a human as a featherless biped. That was the most basic definition that, after thinking forever on it and stuff, that they could come up with to describe a human being, a featherless biped. And so Diogenes took a chicken, he plucked all the feathers, and then walked into the middle of them when they're giving this big discussion on this and dropped it. And there's your man, and then walked out. And so it was just somebody who spurred adaptation in the greater society and greater thought of the time in a society that was relatively open-minded. Um, just an interesting form of adaptation, and again, I do recommend folks check out that individual and the many great stories behind it. There's some dirty ones I'd love to say, but we have hit an hour, so you folks will have to find those yourselves. Um, I'm Cody Fernandez, and I don't really have many other thoughts on adaptability. Again, as always, these giants tend to be tools shaped by our perception and our ability to apply them correctly to a situation. And that's kind of what adaptability is, in a nutshell, is applying it correctly for our own lives and our goals, and uh, not letting that defeat us. Do you have any final thoughts on adaptability?
Just that I've learned to become more adaptable where it's needed and not sacrifice too much, and it's served me well.
I agree. All right. Well, thank you folks so much for joining us on this one. If you have any suggestions for future topics, we'd love to hear them. We also want to hear your thoughts on adaptability or any other topic we have discussed. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for watching, and stick around. We're gonna keep doing this as long as we can.
Yes, indeed. We're going to keep adapting as well. So if you have any ideas or ways that we can adapt to better serve your listening needs or your visual stimulation, whatever we can do to help you enjoy what we're doing, we'd love to hear it.
Yep, let us know.
All right, adios, folks.